together.
Together, okay, then
Nice. Do we have a compromise?
Andrea has one.
I discovered that I had written a paper on the optimum currency area in 2010 and in 2007, and I started to read this, and I found it, I liked it more than in 2007. I thought it is worthwhile to apply it more than then to the present European crisis and to developing countries as well. So, it is about monetary integration. So just the other aspect of regional cooperation, not trade or not directly trade, but currency cooperation or monetary cooperation. And we have traditionally one theory which developed roughly 50 years ago by Robert Mundell, who wrote 9 pages, 9 very, very famous pages, and one must say these 9 pages became famous because they are not very clear. They can be interpreted in so many ways that the interpretation filled libraries and became very important in reality, and to some extent also the European Monetary Union dwells on these 9 pages to some extent. So I want to do this. I will show you first the OCA theory, and I will show you this is from my main point here, that there is not one such theory, although textbooks say so as if there were only one. There is an evolution, and these theories are quite diverse. The latest stage in the evolution of the OCA theory comes from Paul de Grauwe, a Belgian economist, who could be understood as the integration theorist, mainly monetary integration theorist of the European Monetary Union. Then I come to some criticisms of these theories, either in the literature or my own. The old theory from Robert Mundell and other so-called endogenous OCA theories. Then I will show you in my interpretation 7 different types of currency cooperation, which is more than an optimal currency area, and it's different from a currency union as we have it in Europe. Finally, I come to costs and benefits and look at developing countries, but only briefly. So, the predecessors, if you want, the adversaries for Mundell and the later authors were mainly Priewe, who argued in 1953 that if you have fixed exchange rates, say under the Bretton Woods system, then you need the opportunity of wage flexibility or labor factor mobility. And if you do not have labor mobility or factor mobility or factor flexibility, as well as price flexibility, then you shouldn't have fixed exchange rate or flexible exchange rate. So the whole debate was started by Friedman, not under the rubric of OCA, but under the rubric of fixed or flexible exchange rates. And then Robert Mundell came up using this term, optimal currency area, and important is that he talks about areas, not states, not regions, areas. So one point is here that the United States, according to Mundell, is not an optimum currency area. Because there are certain certain factors which, like limited labor mobility or factor mobility, that probably would show that only a smaller part than the US is an optimum currency area. That does not mean that you wanted to split up the United States into 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 parts, or include other areas outside, such as Mexico or parts of Mexico in it. But his main idea was, without using or looking at state or government, that in an optimum currency area, labor mobility, or to be used broader term, factor mobility, labor and capital mobility, but emphasis is on labor mobility, is key. So if there are asymmetric shocks to one part of that area, then so specific and idiosyncratic shock to this one part of the region, be it, say, the United States or whatever, then general macroeconomic policies like monetary or fiscal policy will not work, because the situation in those two parts is different. So asymmetric shocks shouldn't be, or if they are there for whatever reasons, then labor should leave, should migrate out of that region. We do not believe so much in wage reductions or wage flexibility and price flexibility, at least not in the short run. In the long run, perhaps yes, but he was quite mute on this issue, believed in, as I said, in mobility. And if labor leaves, or if, say, there are incentives for capital mobility towards the disadvantaged, shocked area or part of that area, then capital will flow in, just following the marginal productivity of capital theory, that capital flows from capital-rich regions with with lower marginal productivity of capital to those regions with a lower marginal productivity of capital. So the domain is the region or the area, whatever that is. And it was not clear whether or not state government is needed. He alluded in some sentences, but only 2 sentences, that perhaps the common state needs to be attached to one currency, but this was not the point, and on 9 pages you find out that much. So, then 2 years later, McKinnon followed, and he said it's not labor mobility or a few asymmetric shocks, it is the degree of openness as a precondition, and openness is defined here as trade openness, maybe not financial integration, it's trade openness. Better word would be trade connectedness between the 2 regions or parts of that region which want to go together. That would mean, since small economies are normally more open than large ones, that McKinnon's vision of an optimum currency is small states which should go together. By the way, since Mandel meant that labor mobility is key, he had the opinion that there is little scope for larger optimum currency areas. So with this criterion, definitely the European Monetary Union is suboptimal or non-optimal or an anti-optimum currency area, and should not be done. Then Keenan came a few years later, and he said it's not so much trade openness, it is the degree of diversification of goods markets. Because then the probability of asymmetric shocks is low. So if you are diversified, then you are insured against shocks, to some extent at least. And if you follow this criterion, then again, an optimum currency area will most likely be small and will not comprise developed countries and less developed countries. So Eastern Europe should most likely not be integrated into the monetary union, or Mexico should not go together with the United States if you follow the similar degree of diversification in goods markets. Keenan mentioned also fiscal integration that is needed, and this implicitly means that we need fiscal federalism. So we need a state, we need a government, a common government, or at least some transfers between, if we have two governments, still two states, some transfers from one to the other country. To mention this only briefly, Mandela renewed or totally changed his old theory 9 years later, 11 years later, to papers, and he argued now that financial integration is key because now the currency risk premier focus. This abandons his old theory, so he stands first for small unions, if at all, in favor of currency unions or similar. And if you take financial integration as a criterion, then he stands for very large currency unions. So he stands on both sides of the debates. But I should say, that is very important, Mandela did not talk about a currency union. That term is, I think it is not even mentioned in this paper. It is about fixed or flexible exchange rates. So following his response to his adversary, that is Milton Friedman. So that is practically the idea whether Bretton Woods can be extended in this region or that region, or if Bretton Woods falls, what to do then, etc. Then, for a long time, the debate about optimum currency theory seems to be done, and only when in Europe, in the early 1990s, a new approach, a new push for the Maastricht Treaty for Monetary Union was put forward, the so-called new theory of OCAs came up with several papers from Tablas, a Greek, ironically a Greek economist, and this can be seen as a cost-benefit analysis using a number of criteria, a long list of criteria. And if many of those criteria are given, or a fairly large number, then it is good to have a currency union. Now a currency union, not necessarily fixed exchange rate. Now it is somehow the debate changed into a debate about the currency union with the background of the European situation. And this is now similarity of inflation rates, factor mobility, openness, diversification, price and wage flexibility, because this would mean that, or implies, according to many authors, that exchange rate realignments are less needed if price and wage flexibility exists. So that would be a substitute for devaluation in case necessary. Goods market integration, fiscal integration, no need for exchange rate, real exchange rate adjustments, and political will. So everything that was mentioned in the decades before is put in one part. And the key point in the end is that there should be few asymmetric shocks, and few asymmetric shocks would exist if many of these points are fairly fulfilled, or fulfilled to a fairly degree. Which of these criteria is the most important remains very open. I think it is the best. It's just synthesizing everything to be everybody's darling, and it's not theoretically sound. But politicians like to do this. Then a very influential theory came in 1998 from Priewe, which has been coined endogenous theory. And criteria, especially trade openness and also wage flexibility, mobility of labor and capital, they come automatically once you have a currency union. So you don't need them as prior criteria that must be fulfilled. And when you launch such a currency union, they come automatically, maybe not immediately, but after a while. So you just start and wait and see, and it will happen. If this were true, then there is a case for very broad and very heterogeneous currency unions. So I take the most imaginable heterogeneous currency union, that is the German currency union of East Germany and West Germany of 1990. They were put together for purely political reasons. And it became, in a way, an optimum currency area after a couple of years. So this is something they must have had in mind, not directly, but in a way. And however, the other side of the coin is that this German currency union, which did not fit any of the criteria mentioned by all the other 1 to 5 theories, this is financed with a huge amount of transfers and requires a state, a government, and it is very costly. So from a purely economic point of view, it shouldn't have been done, but from a political point of view, you want to have it, even if the ingenuity of this is given in the end, then it is costly. So it is not a good answer that can be generalized to any kind of situation. Finally, Paul de Grauer's theories are very similar to this criteria cost-benefit approach and to the endogenous theory of Frankel and Rose, but he adds that political union is necessary in the monetary union, at least sooner or later. So he pleads for a political union in the EMU. In that way, he differs from other authors. I guess I don't have much time to go into more detail, but I think it's in some issues I will go a little bit deeper into him because he's a very interesting author. Interestingly, none of the OCA theories directly address developing countries, but developing countries are not excluded. So these theories are general. But even though they are general, in the mindset of the authors, I think third world countries were absent. So they were meant as theories for the world from which the authors come. So implicitly, they are much tailor-made for developing countries. Nevertheless, I believe that developing countries can learn a lot from these theories in the bad and in the good. Just to show you the idea of de Grauer's theory with this very primitive graph. On the ordinate, you have costs and benefits of an optimum currency area, and the main variable on the horizontal line is trade openness. And the more trade openness or trade connectedness you have between two or more partner countries, let's say for simplicity now, we're talking about countries, not regions, the more benefits you have and the less costs. Why this? Well, it is argued the more trade openness or trade connectedness exists, the less possible is exchange rate realignment. So therefore, exchange rates are not needed any longer, or the cost of the loss of the exchange rates are not very high. So this idea is very important, and I come back to that. The benefits curve is beyond the intersection point, higher than the cost curve. So this is the area of OC. And to the left of this intersection point, it is a suboptimal currency area. And if you believe that exchange rates are not really necessary, that the market system leads to convergence and not or very little divergence, then the cost curve is quite low, so it might be the red falling line. That would be, according to Priewe's opinion, more monetarist or neoclassical way. So then even with a low degree of trade openness, it is easy to come to a currency union, even a large currency union, to have it as an optimal or even very optimal area if you are far beyond to the right of this intersection point. And this graph is now modified in many aspects, but there is no time to go through it. Let me just go through some key arguments of the graph, which play a big role. So he believes that the exchange rate has only, or exchange rate realignment has only short-run effects, if they have any effects at all. So long-run effects, like a long-run overvaluation of the currency, is excluded. So this is not his point. There's equilibrium, in other words. So an overvaluation will only be in short-run disequilibrium, and in the long run we have equilibrium. That is standard neoclassical theory. So long-run disequilibrium is excluded by definition. This is virtually impossible if you believe in general equilibrium theory. So the ultimate basis of his ideas is quite standard general equilibrium theory, I would say. Then you might argue, and others argue this way, that if you have a permanent inflation differential between member countries, you can't have a single common monetary policy, because real interest rates would differ in that case if you have one central bank with one short-term interest rate. And he argues against this with the Laurissa-Samuelson effect, and it says if these inflation differentials are caused by Laurissa-Samuelson, then they are acceptable. But I have no time to go into Laurissa-Samuelson. That is very controversial and empirically very unclear. So if this is not, this argument is not true, then the pillar of the whole theory is breaking away. So again, the strong trade integration is key for him, and this trade integration is most likely to increase once you have it. You have a currency union. So therefore, there is also some elements of endogenous wholesale theory included. But since monetary policy is most likely to be not perfectly fit for all the members and fiscal policy as well, there might be a political union with transfers necessary. However, he admits that Krugman might be right to some extent. I have not mentioned Krugman here, that if you have strong trade integration, it could be that is similar to the presentation from Linda yesterday, that one region might, or one country might be the winner and the other might be the loser. So you would have a polarization, or could have a polarization, and then divergence through a strong tendency towards division of labor. One region is doing this and the other is doing that, and so this would increase divergence and not convergence. And if this were the case, he argues, well, this could be, and then we have to look how to deal with this. We need the government for that, and this would be a severe argument against an optimum currency area. And it could even be that divergence goes so far that one region or one country is outcompeted and there's nothing left, so industry is destroyed. few points of criticism. I think we must see what is OCA theory about. Do we want to talk about an optimum currency area, the currency union, or do we want to talk about fixed or flexible exchange rate? These are two issues. And well, the currency union are irreversibly fixed exchange rates, and therefore you can use one money, one currency. So that makes a difference. Excluding the state is wrong from my point of view for a number of reasons. Excluding policies as well. I follow here Charles Goodhart, who simply says, I come with a quote from later, but he says, currency and state are tied together, and in history it was always very clear that if you have one currency, you need sooner or later one state. Well, then there is the widespread assumption that labor mobility and even more wage flexibility can substitute for exchange rate changes, and I doubt this. Labor mobility might do this job, but you must see whether labor mobility is only one way or two-way labor mobility. If you take it in a correct and serious way, you will need, if you have asymmetric shocks, you must take it in a two-way manner. Otherwise, you could say US and Mexico is a perfect Mandel-like optimum currency area because there is labor mobility from Mexico to the US, but unfortunately, the other way around, labor mobility is not so. The assumption, the widespread assumption, especially in the endogenous theories of OCA, that flexible labor can be done and can replace the exchange rate is for a number of reasons which are mainly put forward by Keynesian theories or by Keynes himself is very questionable. So I will just mention that this is normally connected to deflation, to wage deflation, price deflation in case of depreciation of a country that needs depreciation. And Keynes has shown, and many other post-Keynesians have shown that this is highly critical. We see presently in Greece and other countries in the European Union that this is connected with very high costs and very likely to lead to depression and financial crisis, banking crisis, etc. Well, in many of these, in the old theory, fiscal transfers are not included. Then there is somehow an obsession of asymmetric shocks. A shock is a one-time thing, and an asymmetric shock is pretty clear that this is a demand shock in Mandel especially, so suddenly there is no demand for the products that are produced in one region or part of that region, and this of course is a problem, and that means that macroeconomic policies cannot respond to this. But what is not seen is that there can also be supply shocks, and even maybe the point is not to have shocks, but to have institutional settings which are adverse, which are quite different when 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 countries go together. They might have totally different institutions, different wage formation systems, and this causes or can contribute to divergence. This is not a shock, this is a gradual difference between, well, say, the Spanish and the German type of wage formation. Very difficult to change, and this causes a divergent road of development between the two countries. This is especially true, I think, for developing countries. So if you think of the East African countries, they have different cultures, they have different colonial traditions, they have different institutions, they have different ethnic position, and this constitutes divergence, and this is very difficult to make homogeneous. And this cannot be assessed with the idea of asymmetric shocks. Well, I said already a few words of critique on the endogenous OCA theories. I think it is pretty clear that there is some element of endogeneity, but not 100%. So there is an incomplete endogenous fulfillment of the criteria. And therefore, I would say it is a very dangerous theory. If you embark on this and you can hardly reverse it, then you're stuck in a very large OCA currency union, and you might see it doesn't work. And exactly this happens. Let me mention a few critics. I will not go through all of them. Sir Alan Walters, the advisor of Margaret Thatcher, very conservative guy, said the monetary union is wrong because we have the same short-term interest rate in the monetary union because of the central bank and the single currency, and divergent inflation rates, and this leads to pro-cyclical real interest rates and divergence. I think perfectly correct analysis, and we see that this is right, correct in the past performance of EMU. But in EMU, it was, they did not pay much attention to this. Or Keynesian author, Tony Thirlwell, I quote it, said, the euro applies one rate of interest for all participating countries regardless of their individual economic circumstances. This can only be described as the economics of the madhouse. Charles Goodhart, money is tied to state, so you need a common state, otherwise it won't work. This includes a banking union with banking supervision, centralized fiscal policy, or again, Thirlwell, from a Keynesian point of view, the currency union leads to a loss of economic sovereignty, loss of the exchange rate, loss of monetary fiscal policy, all the important macroeconomic tools that are necessary to stabilize the capitalist economy. I would say, unless you have a common state. You would agree. Martin Feldstein, a more mainstream economist from the United States, critical of the EU, like many American economists. Well, a single interest rate, if you have no exchange rate any longer, no cross-border labor mobility, little wage flexibility in welfare states, no fiscal federalism of any relevant size, this will lead to a failure of monetary union when they feel that they are proven right by what is happening presently. Now, I run through a number of different currency cooperation systems. The first three might, they are in italics, they might apply to developing countries, or might be used, the others not. So just pooling of reserves, managed floating exchange rate regimes in a coordinated way. This is not a currency union, but a currency cooperation. Of course, very important and healthy. Bretton Woods type of currency systems, but with adjustable exchange rates. Or exchange rate regimes with a band, so with full capital mobility, maybe between several states and a leading central bank, but not yet a currency union. Finally, you might have a hierarchy from full monetary integration with irrevocably fixed exchange rate and common central bank, down to a political union where everything is done common, in a common manner, and in between you might have official dollarization, where you use the rendization or euroization, or whatever you pick, where you do not have any monetary policy any longer, but you just accept other countries' currency. So you see the breadth of the issues, and the currency union is only one point here, and my point, you can imagine, is that developing countries I will go only in the experience in this, it is kind of experiment the last 13 years. And so what happened is that we did not have a growth push, no integration push since 1999. So the dividend the promised dividend of a monetary union did not happen. In many indicators, there is a clear empirical evidence that the conversion even rose or remained constant. And between 2007 and the last 5 years, the dispersion rose even stronger because of the crisis. Until 2007, there was for some countries seemingly convergence, but we have learned that this convergence was not sustainable. It was built on speculation on house price bubbles, at least to some extent. So we have now a divide between a number of countries, which are sometimes called GICS countries, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, and Spain, after 2008, and the other surplus countries. But also among the surplus countries, we have Germany, for instance, with as low growth as Portugal. So even for a surplus country, there is not really a positive performance, clearly positive performance. Many say Germany had a lost decade in the first decade of this century. The plus side is low inflation in EU on average compared to the 1990s. But you can see that the inflation rates diverged, and we can see that in some countries, especially in the problematic countries, the inflation differentials accumulated. So precisely the Waters critique became true, that the inflation rates or the inflation levels or price levels diverge more and more and more, which makes competitiveness very complicated. For these countries, they lost competitive, and if the inflation rate is always 2 percentage points or so higher in some countries and 2 percentage points lower than others, then monetary policy fits nobody. It fits only the fictitious average, and this is not the idea. The exchange rate fits nobody, it fits only the average, and this is not very helpful, and leads to a split of the union in 2 parts, and so it is. And therefore, in my view, the Eurozone is at the brink of collapse. And it's open whether it is an agony of a decade or so, or it will be an outright collapse in the months, days, years to come. So you see the divergence in this interest rate curve, just a snapshot. So first convergence, then divergence. So there must be something wrong. GDP growth quite divergent. And the worst graph is this. This is the international net investment position. And this is liabilities of the private sector and the governmental sector, and assets vis-à-vis other countries. And the upper black curve is Germany for the surplus countries, and the others are the problematic deficit countries, and you see the divergence. And it's ever increasing. So these countries are over-indebted, and the others are getting an enormous credit position, and this causes extreme divergence. I have to chase through this and will conclude. So I think the old OCA theories stipulate a small currency union or small areas with fixed exchange rates, and nothing big or large. The new OCA theories, they are inconsistent. There is no sound theory. They will stipulate a very large currency union. They are not only about fixed exchange rate. In the end, the OCA theory, the new OCA theory, is strongly influenced by new classical economics. So monetary fiscal policy has only short-term influence, exchange rate policy has only short-term influence. In the end, real, so-called real economy is determined in growth and perspectives. Well, the OCA theories confuse fixed exchange rate with currency union. I mentioned this several times. Balance of payment issues are strongly neglected or simplified, oversimplified. The role of the state is systematically excluded, with very few exceptions. The EMU experience stipulates the Charles Goodhart view of a congruence of currency and state. It is necessary, at least maybe not a super state, but state functions, very important state functions, especially banking union with banking supervision, deposit insurance in a common manner. The trust in endogeneity of OCA is not justified. This is, well, the EMU crisis is proof that this endogeneous theory is outright wrong. I think a currency union will work properly if few similarly structured economies go together, must be small. There should be little divergence. There should be strong trade connections. There should be a banking union. We need fiscal transfers. That is, we need some sort of political unification, or a federation, not a confederation. And developing countries should focus on monetary cooperation in whatever forms. There are many forms, many experiences, but they should be very cautious to embark on a currency union. They should not follow Europe in this respect. Especially developing countries should maintain the tools, or such tools, to depreciate their currency if necessary to avoid lasting overvaluation, which we have seen so often in many developing countries. Thank you, Alex, for giving me more time.
All right.
Thanks to the audience.
Okay, thank you.
What we can learn from the Euro crisis on the theory of regional monetary integration too. I will try to be brief and go directly into the point where Jan said OCA does not include developing countries, and explain why this is the case, and especially relate to the question of why OCA does not consider the specific monetary conditions of developing countries and emerging markets, but how these specific monetary conditions of those countries should be included in understanding regional monetary integration of those countries better, and maybe also contrast Jan's final remark that developing countries and emerging markets should not embark in the direction of currency unions, but rather put a, let's say, counter thesis and say there is no predetermined path to currency union, and whether countries embark on such path or not depends very much on whether they meet the cooperation and institutional requirements or not, and this in the end determines whether such countries are well served by going into the direction of regional monetary cooperation or not. Okay, so what we did is our paper deals with the varieties that we see empirically of regional monetary cooperation in developing country areas, and we relate these varieties to the question of how and why they hold the potential to reduce volatility in the regions of cooperating countries. This paper is partially based on a research that we did for UNCTAD with the colleagues of Mr. Kotte and UNCTAD, especially with Heiner Flasbeck, but also Andre Biancarelli, which some of you probably know, and Sonja Boffa, on regional monetary cooperation in the context of growth enhancing policies, and we especially researched new arrangements of financial cooperation in Latin America. So the systematization is kind of developed out of the study that we did together with the other colleagues. I will briefly ask the question whether that relates to Jan's presentation, but the regional monetary cooperation is still on the table in times of global financial turmoil and the euro crisis, and there's very divergent views on that question, as you will see. And then explain why and how one could go beyond OCA theory in order to understand regional monetary cooperation in southern areas, and in order to understand why this may help to reduce economic volatility in developing countries' regions. Then give a brief empirical view on the variety of regional monetary cooperation schemes that we find and how they influence region stability, and give some brief conclusions. As I said, there's very divergent views on whether the euro crisis is now the end of regional monetary cooperation or the beginning, let's say. On the one hand side, here's a quote from a colleague from the American University School of International Service who said, in a nutshell, that the euro crisis shows that essentially regional monetary cooperation has come to an end and is not worthwhile following. So it's not, he says it's not the time to be building alternatives to the deep-pocketed and well-established and functioning international financial institutions that we already have, like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, or in that case, the Regional Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank. On the other hand, the ASEAN General Secretary in 2011 said, when the economy of the US and Europe stagnates, this has an impact on other regions, and this is exactly the reason why those regions have to focus more on cooperating and region integration. So I'll start with this very separate views and come back to concluding on how, on an interpretation, how we could answer this divergent questions and views. But first of all, introduce you to how we conceptualize and how we systematize regional monetary cooperation in developing countries and emerging markets. The basic question is why still in face of the euro crisis or in face of financial crisis and in general, developing countries even pursue regional monetary cooperation. And we start analyzing the why and also the effects that regional monetary cooperation may have on the cooperating countries by considering that developing countries and emerging markets in face of international volatility and vulnerability to such macroeconomic volatility need policy space to in a counter-cyclical way, to pursue a stabilizing monetary macroeconomic policy. The necessary condition for that is that the country experiences an absence of external shocks, so that the number of external shocks can be reduced and or negative effects can be buffered. And a sufficient condition for this is, on top of all, to have competitive real exchange rates that are growth enhancing in the medium to long-term sense. What we see here as potential contributors of regional monetary cooperation to these two conditions is that regional monetary cooperation may reduce the volatility because it enhances the buffering space of cooperating countries to react to external shocks jointly. It also has a supportive effect on competitive and stable real exchange rates. And I'll go through in this presentation now on the why this is the case and why we see these conditions to be enhanced or supported by regional monetary cooperation. First of all, Sebastian actually asked me to introduce briefly our concept of south and southern and northern countries and how we separate this and why we talk about south-south regional monetary cooperation, so I'll do this briefly. We separate south and north basically on the concept of the original sin hypothesis by saying that we call a country a northern country if it is able to indebt itself abroad in its own currency, and a southern country if it is not able to do this but only indebt itself in a foreign currency. Similarly, especially for the case of China, this has been researched by McKinnon and Schnabel, you can say that a northern country is a country that is in a position to act as an international debtor in its own currency, versus a southern country is one that is able to act as an international debtor only in a foreign currency, which would be the case of China. So based on this original sin, so-called original sin hypothesis and the conflicted virtue hypothesis, we talk about southern countries as those, or south-south regional monetary cooperation as cooperation schemes where no international reserve currency is involved. This is the second criterion, and of countries that are more, or the majority of those countries is able to indebt itself only in foreign currency, which is important to have in mind when looking at the monetary policy constraints of the countries involved, because then we see that we are dealing here with areas that are mainly having liabilities or assets denominated, or net liabilities denominated in foreign currency, which in the end has an effect on their exposure to potential, or the exposure to balance sheet effects, which means a currency or maturity mismatch in their balance sheets, and hence a different requirement for exchange rate stabilization. And also, these are mostly countries with fragile financial markets, which means there's no diversified financial background in order to hedge such net foreign currency denominated open financial positions. Okay, so this is kind of the background and the classification of the countries we look at. And then we find a variety of different forms of cooperation, which we would consider even broader than what Jan outlined before. So Jan started with regional liquidity pools, I think, and we would say you could even go like steps back and say cooperation may start with formal or informal policy dialogue. Cooperation may also include such things as regional payment systems, which I will introduce in a minute. So there's cooperation we would even include regional financial market integration initiatives, or regional financial market development initiatives that you may even consider to be kind of before regional liquidity pooling. So there's a variety of forms in which countries come together in order to pursue a certain common monetary or financial policy approach, or not even approach, but regional directions. We have here a very broad but still interesting overview of examples, and this doesn't even cover all of such cooperation schemes, of regional monetary South-South cooperation. For example, the Mercosur, which is marked in blue here, as an example of a cooperation that did not yet take concrete steps into the sphere of monetary cooperation, but is kind of envisioning even such things as a currency union and a common currency. Still, it could be included here because there's small steps of policy dialogue in this sense or in this direction. So basically you see with this map there's a variety of forms, but also a large number of forms in different, let's say, situations, steps towards, forwards and backwards, something like a monetary cooperation or even integration. Okay, so we suggest in order to understand such variety and the large number of forms that we some steps beyond optimal currency area theory. And since Jan explained extensively what the theoretical concept is, it's easy now to see that what our critique towards OCA theory is that there's basically two questions, critical questions that the theoretical framework is dismissing, which is that we think regional monetary integration theory should ask how such integration schemes enhance macroeconomic stability and how such integration schemes can initiate growth and investment in the respective region. And we see that OCA theory, as Jan outlined, is focused pretty much on a cost-benefit analysis, whether monetary policy or non-autonomy that OCA theory associates with flexible exchange rates is higher or lower in larger or smaller currency areas with fixed exchange rates. And we see that this kind of dichotomy of looking at the problem pretty much excludes of what is important to look at if you want to understand the benefits, costs and benefits of regional monetary cooperation, in particular in developing countries. So basically, as Jan outlined, what OCA theory comes to is a trades first sequencing approach that says you have to have trade integration in order to have synchronized business cycles, and then you can move on further steps. And there's also a very kind of determined idea of a path towards from trade integration or from separate countries towards, in the end, a political integration or a currency union. And we put a question mark behind these assumptions and behind this narrow focus of cost-benefit analysis of flexible versus fixed exchange rates. Why did we put a question mark here? We see three major problems. There are several others, but the three major problems is that flexible or unilaterally fixed exchange rates, which OCA focuses at, are kind of destabilizing options for developing countries and emerging markets, particularly or especially because we have to deal, or these countries deal with unhedged foreign currency debt and net balance sheet effects, as I said before. So we see that giving up flexible exchange rates, which can relate in times of volatility very much to balance sheet effects and to counter, let's say, or negative effects on the net foreign liabilities of those countries, that giving up flexible exchange rates may indeed, or in effect, be a benefit rather than a cost, as OCA theory terms it. Second, even unilateral macroeconomic policy decisions, or especially unilateral macroeconomic policy decisions, may have contagious and, let's say, negative effects on the whole region. For example, the unilateral decision of Brazil in 1999 to devalue the real had severe contagious and negative effects on the neighboring countries, and kind of feedback effects on Brazil in the end, or on the whole regional cooperation scheme, because it triggered down to trade disputes, etc., because the other countries had to somehow restore competitiveness against the real in Brazil. So such contagious effects and so-called beggar-than-able policies, in the case of non-cooperation, can be kind of mitigated or reduced in regional cooperation initiatives, even at a very low level, even if such cooperation initiatives are at a very low or even informal level. And third, we will still hold on to, in contrast to Jan, and to dynamic effects of trade and financial integration. So kind of a feedback loop between trade and financial integration and monetary cooperation dynamics. In the end, we see that the trade-first approach is certainly not the only option for the sequencing of regional monetary cooperation, or can even be a stabilizing path. If trade integration or if trade cooperation starts between countries without looking at the monetary or especially the exchange rate side, such things as a unilateral devaluation by Brazil may happen and destroy even efforts in trade integration that have been made before. So having these three major problems with OCA theory in mind, we look at different forms of regional monetary cooperation, and especially look at regional payment systems, and we see their major contribution to growth and stability by their effect or by their potential to self-insure a region, basically and very simply through increased inter-regional economic linkages through trade. The second form we look at is regional reserve pooling or liquidity pooling, where we see the major contribution in self-insurance through liquidity provision in the region. The third form we look at is regional financial development, or here regional bond market initiatives, where we see a contribution to stability and growth by, let's say, using economies of scale to increase financial market diversity in the region or jointly. And the fourth, and let's say most advanced form would be exchange rate coordination, which is where we see an essential contribution to stability by ending negative neighbor policies and prevent or mitigate negative externalities from distorting competitive unilateral policies. I start with the regional payment systems, with the form of regional payment systems that we see, for example, historically in the European payment systems that still is present in the Latin American Integration Association, the Asian Clearing Union, and has started, or Brazil and Argentina have embarked on such a regional payment system and the system of payments in local currency. And also there's a discussion on the SUCRE, which some of you may know, on the unified system for regional compensation between ALBA members. So there's a diversified set of examples for such regional payment system. They also share the same. They all share the same objective of fostering trade by reducing transaction costs, basically, to the use of domestic instead of extra-regional currencies in intra-regional trade. We would say this is a rather small instrument, and this is directed basically at enhancing intra-regional trade, which may modestly contribute to reducing macroeconomic vulnerability, but in general it's more a learning ground if you would like to regional monetary cooperation than a large tool to enhancing stability. Still, and this also relates to the point that a low level of macroeconomic coordination is generally required here. Still, once those schemes, like the super scheme, for example, aim at more ambitious goals of creating, for example, a joint currency union in order to embark on some further process of regional monetary integration, this starts getting rather complex, or let's say demanding, in terms of adjustment mechanisms between the different countries once they start joining something like a regional currency union. So as long as it's a small-scale scheme and there's no currency unit or further objectives involved, it has a moderate requirement for regional coordination. As soon as countries would like to embark with this tool, let's say, on further steps towards regional monetary coordination, larger institutional and coordination requirements are in place. Still, this is a very small-scale form. Now, when we look at the second form that we include here, the regional reserve pooling, we see that there's still a rather low level of institutional and coordination requirements, but it gets more intense once countries start providing emergency liquidity to each other and start coordinating kind of their foreign exchange reserves in a way that where all countries are involved. Those countries need to or will in the end benefit more once they have they can rely on the stable macroeconomic path of their peers in the region. So coordination requirements are intensifying in regional reserve pooling arrangements. The objective of such arrangements is an efficient self-insurance, more efficient than individual self-insurance against short-term liquidity shortages and or uncontrolled devaluations in periods of massive capital outflows. We have experiences like in the Latin American Reserve Fund, FLAR, and in the Southeast Asian Shanghai Initiative, now called Shanghai Initiative Multilateralization. And what we see is that so far those arrangements have the advantage of having a quick dispersal of liquidity in contrast to, and the disadvantage of being rather small, which makes them more profitable for or beneficial for smaller countries because they can quickly draw on an appropriate scale of liquidity in case of crisis or emergency, need be, and rather costly, or let's say not that useful for large countries in case of need of emergency liquidity, since those arrangements have a rather small scale. Even the most prominent example of this Shanghai Initiative is compared to, for example, China's foreign exchange reserve holdings, a rather small arrangement where China would never be in the situation of resolving a liquidity crisis with, but rather participates as a larger contributor in the fund and may have an interest in the stability effect this has on the region and its regional partner countries. And at the same time, those arrangements are often compared to global liquidity provision arrangements, such as through the International Monetary Fund, where you have the advantage of having access to a large volume of liquidity, but the disadvantage of having a rather or comparatively longer period of dispersal and a less kind of say enforcement mechanisms than in the regional arrangement. So in the end we see that in reserve pooling it's even less the macroeconomic harmonization of the region, but rather the divergence of the region that feeds into stability of the mechanism, such as in the case of the Shanghai Initiative, we see that if countries do not draw liquidity at the same time, the arrangement is more stable and serves its purpose. And if countries are diverse in the sense of contributing to the fund, there's more beneficial effect for smaller countries in the arrangement. Also, what this means that it is not necessarily a common macroeconomic stance that those countries need in order to stabilize the arrangement, rather than stable enforcement mechanisms in order to make this tool serving stability for the region. Okay, the third form that we look at is regional financial development in the form of bond market development initiatives, which we see, for example, in the Asian bond market initiatives in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in ASEAN. And the overall objective of such arrangement is to avoid dependence on foreign finance or by fostering bond market development in the region. And also to diversify regional markets in order to be able to introduce hedging instruments, to introduce buffering elements, and to prevent financial crisis and contagious effects too. In order to prevent contagious effects in a common regional financial arrangement, at the same time coordination of monetary and financial market policies is mandatory in the sense that the more integrated financial markets get, the higher are the requirements in order to prevent negative contagious effects and to foster a diversified but stable and crisis buffer development of financial markets. Again, small countries may benefit more from such arrangements. For example, in South Africa, we see that the smaller countries benefit a lot from being able to use, in a sense, or go through the the larger partner South African stock market, for example, instead of building up right from the scratch own diversified financial markets. So there might be a benefit of having kind of an anchor currency or kind of focus currency market where smaller countries could orient themselves to. And here we start seeing that what I said initially for regional payment systems too, all of such, even in small scale levels, such arrangements definitely benefit more if overall the regional macroeconomic and starting with exchange rate policies are developed in a more harmonized way than if they develop in a diversified way. So such arrangements and especially regional financial development and also the next step that we will take to exchange rate coordination need some kind of a harmonized monetary macroeconomic stance. If this is not the case, macroeconomic coordination becomes costly for all involved countries. As Jan outlined previously too, like what we see at the moment for the European, for the Eurozone, there's a certain, as Jan said, he's expecting the Eurozone to split up or to get splitted sooner or later. This is the case for such cooperation arrangements too. As long as there's no harmonized or let's say common direction of monetary policy, the arrangement is probably not going to be stable, and even regional financial market development where there's no common currency involved and no deeper forms of monetary integration, such common direction is needed in order to stabilize and benefit from the whole arrangement. The last form that we looked at is regional exchange rate coordination, and the example is the common monetary area that I just mentioned around the South African rand. And here it's very clear that the objective of the whole arrangement is to prevent regional integration, to enforce regional trade and financial integration on the basis of a common currency orientation towards one regional currency, and to end backwards enable policies and to end unilateral exchange rate evaluations or other policy decisions that may negatively affect the region. What is definitely needed or beneficial is kind of a regional anchor currency, which means that there's a certain heterogeneity in the arrangement too, or can be, but in the end the stability effect of a regional anchor is probably higher than the cost of the heterogeneity in the arrangement by having a regional anchor currency, since such currency is in the position to function as a lender of last resort for the region as a whole, which means to provide emergency liquidity due to its larger, more diversified markets and overall economic size, and therefore to step in the reaction to external shocks and have a stabilizing effect on the region as a whole. Again, smaller countries benefit more. At the same time, here the costs are rising for smaller countries in order to adapt to the monetary policy stance of the anchor country, if an anchor country is in place. The ASEAN example, or the ASEAN +3 example with China, Japan, and South Korea included, shows that it may not even need a formal intra-regional anchor country arrangement, such as the South African rand, but that even informal extra-regional currency orientation, in this case towards the US dollar, may provide support for common exchange rate or monetary policy stance, and in the end for the region to be supportive in order to develop competitive regional exchange rates. Here, as I said, coordination requirements or coordination is mandatory in order to bring the region towards a harmonized direction that is beneficial, that could in the end be beneficial for stabilizing the region as a whole. To conclude, regional monetary cooperation may, in these different forms that we outlined, contribute to counter-cyclical growth-enhancing and stabilizing macroeconomic policies, but not like as an end in itself. Rather, it may be kind of a, how to say it, incentive, or has feedbacks with macroeconomic policy orientation towards the same stance for the region. So it's not about introducing cooperation and macroeconomic policies of region will harmonize, but rather about even small steps towards coordinating monetary policies may in itself again create incentives to go further steps, and or countries may decide that divergence is too large and there are several smaller scale arrangements that initiate a stabilizing moment for the region. We would say that the euro crisis simply signals that macroeconomic coordination has to be broader and deeper than currently is the case in the Eurozone. I would also say that, I think it's on the slide somewhere, that monetarist orientation as we find, or an orthodox orientation as we find it in the European Eurozone policy, is not mandatory for regional monetary cooperation. So if there's different policy stances applied in regional monetary cooperation, it could still be a way to go forward for southern countries, depending on the respective coordination requirements that we outlined here. And as I said, we see a strong interdependence between common monetary and macroeconomic policy orientation and regional monetary cooperation. What this means is that even regional payment systems or small-scale arrangements can be effective if a common macroeconomic stance or even regional exchange rate coordination efforts are in place or are pursued. The crucial condition is, as I said, a homogenization at least of the macroeconomic policy strategies or a common vision of monetary policy cooperation in the medium to long-term perspective. And even such small-scale initiatives may create incentives for exchange rate and macroeconomic cooperation. So whenever a region intends to go further than an informal policy dialogue on the monetary policy of the region, some kind of common understanding of monetary and financial policies is needed in order to stabilize them. So it's kind of a feedback loop between steps towards cooperation and implementation and coordination of cooperation, we would say. And of course, as I hope this research shows, is that there's a need to broaden the theoretical approach. There's a need to go beyond OCA theory in order to understand potential benefits and potential costs of regional monetary cooperation, especially for southern regions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurissa, for your presentation. So now I open the floor for questions. Somebody wants to ask some questions? Okay, I have Ms. Bauer and Dr. Kotte.
Coming to Jan, well, we have a little time. I would love to discuss with you the relevance of the central impact on development time. What I find astonishing in your